Felix Nussbaum is a German Jewish Surrealist painter. His work gives us a rare glimpse into the essence of one individual among the victims of the Holocaust. Nussbaum studied extensively in the arts. In 1922, he studied at the Hamburg State School of Applied Arts. In 1933, the private Lenman Funk School in Berlin, and from 1924 to 25, he was a student at the Berlin School of Fine and Applied Arts. From 1929, he had a studio which he shared with the Polish painter and later partner and wife, Felika Platek. His Berlin studio was set alight in 1933 due to his Jewish beliefs. It is believed that some 150 of his works were destroyed in the flames. Felix and his wife changed residence around different parts of Europe over the next few years. They lived in Brussels as of 1937. However, when German troops marched into Belgium in 1940, Nussbaum was arrested as a hostile foreigner and was sent to a detention camp in France. He managed to escape from the camp and reunited with his wife in Brussels. He hid his paintings with two friends in 1942. Nussbaum and his wife spent 2 years hiding in a friend's apartment in Belgium. He continued painting at this time. In 1944, he and his wife were discovered by the German authorities and deported to Auschwitz, where he was murdered within a month of being there.
The way in which Nussbaum viewed himself as a Jew, a German, and an artist is fascinating. His early works display a young man on a journey seeking affirmation of his Jewish identity. The art created invokes a strong sense of pride centered around his Jewishness. His art serves as a narrative which unfolds before us. When Nussbaum returns to his notion of Jewish identity in his later works, which were created when he was in exile, what we are now presented with, in particular in his self-portrait with a Jewish identity card, is someone whose Jewishness has been tainted by symbols of persecution and degradation imposed on the Jews by the Nazis. Liz Elby, part of the International School for Holocaust Studies, provides us with a detailed comparison of two pieces of Nussbaum's work, one from earlier in his career titled The Two Jews, Interior of Osnabrück Synagogue, and then, perhaps his most famous work, from towards the end of his life, a self-portrait with a Jewish identity card. The Two Jews, Interior of Osnabrück Synagogue, was created in 1926 by 21-year-old Nussbaum. Liz Elby attempts to dissect the painting in relation to how it represents Nussbaum's faith. She states, "The young Nussbaum is spatially placed behind the cantor and yet towers above him. His self-portrait is a truly commanding presence. His prayer shawl covers his head and shoulders. He stands sternly, almost defiantly, and locks the eyes of the viewer into his intense gaze, almost as if challenging him. What does Nussbaum's proud and defiant stance mean? Is he saying to his Jewish viewers, 'I'm proud to be a Jew, and even as I take my place as an equal in German society, I will not forsake my Jewish culture and identity'? Or, in the increasingly anti-Semitic atmosphere of Osnabrück in the 1920s, is this defiance aimed towards those non-Jews who would disparage Nussbaum because of his religion? In 1943, little more than a year before his murder in Auschwitz, Nussbaum created his famous self-portrait with the Jewish identity card. We have already made reference to the type of symbolism in this painting, which enforces ideas of persecution. Perhaps on a less obvious note, we should revisit the idea of the gaze. Explored again by Liz Elby, she states, "His expression is furtive, alert. His direct gaze is penetrating. What does it mean to us as viewers? Is it a conspiratorial gaze, asking us to help keep the secret of his Jewish identity? Is it the gaze of the accuser, demanding from the viewer answers as to why he has been allowed to be so humiliated and persecuted? Is it the terrified gaze his persecutors will see when he is eventually arrested in July 1944? Or perhaps, 17 years after first painting himself as a Jew, he again asks the viewer to consider the implications of what it means to be a Jew at this point in history, with the threat of annihilation looming so close?"
Charlotte grew up in a middle-class German Jewish family in Berlin. She succeeded in gaining admission to the Berlin Academy of Fine Arts in 1936, where she studied painting for 2 years. However, the anti-Semitic policy of Hitler's Third Reich was increasing pressure on all the institutions, and in the summer of 1938 her enrolment was cancelled. In 1933, the Salomon family decided to leave Germany, and Charlotte was sent to live with her grandparents in the south of France. By September 1943, Charlotte had married another German Jewish refugee, Alexander Nagler. At this time, the Nazis had intensified their search for Jews living in the south of France. Charlotte and her husband were captured and transported to Auschwitz on the 7th of October 1943. It is thought that Charlotte was probably gassed on the same day she arrived there, at which point she was 5 months pregnant with her first child.
Charlotte Salomon completed her work, an autobiography titled Life or Theatre, over a concentrated and fanatic 18-month period between the years of 1940 and 1942. Charlotte was 24 years old when she started the work, in which she attempts to come to terms with her turbulent family past as well as her experiences as a Jew living in Berlin. It is said that in 1940 she was reflecting over the fact that 8 members of her family had killed themselves consecutively over the years, and with this traumatic discovery in mind, she was faced with what she called the question: either to end her life or to undertake something eccentric and mad. Charlotte went into retirement and started to paint. The end result was a series of almost 800 gouaches, an artistic narrative which sought to articulate the story of her life. The artwork was arranged into scenes, enriched by dialogues, soliloquies, and musical references. Although it is a unified piece of work, it is also a stylistically diverse series of paintings. As the story of Charlotte's gouaches develops, the style in which she paints changes with it. In the early stages, the paintings detailed narrative scenes in which she used bright colours. However, these give way to roughly sketched pictures which represent certain moods. Then, towards the end, the brushstrokes become more and more rapid, as if Charlotte knew her time was running out. The style in which Charlotte paints is unrestrained. Jagged lines often zigzag across the pictures. However, each watercolour is without contours, creating an interesting parallel. Charlotte was bound and suppressed for being a Jew, facing a prolonged period in exile, yet her art becomes a self-governing, unregimented expression of the story of her life. An area of debate has emerged over the way in which life or theatre should be presented. While it is usually exhibited on the walls of museums, it could just as reasonably be presented horizontally, like a book. But then, of course, we must consider the title itself, which indicates that this really is a piece of theatre, which Charlotte accounted for in the structure of her work, and with the inclusion of a dialogue and musical references. David Kaufman, an English lecturer at George Mason University, explores a debate which centres around which context actually defines Salomon's life. Was she a survivor of family torment, or was she a victim of the Third Reich? Interestingly, the context of Charlotte's work appears to change depending on where the art is being discussed or displayed. Not surprisingly, when the art was displayed at the Yad Vashem, the show's curator, Yehudit Shendar, frames the work, or Charlotte's life, in terms of its gruesome end. He describes, Salomon's psychic resolve and artistic creativity helped her avoid her family's destiny, but couldn't withstand the physical power of the Nazi troops. Now, although Charlotte's physical being could not withstand the power of the Nazis, what is apparent is that unlike many other victims of the Holocaust, what Charlotte was able to leave behind serves as a stubborn memorial to herself. Shendar encapsulates this point when he writes, "Art cannot replace life, but it has the power to endure." In this display of her works at Yad Vashem, Charlotte Salomon finally becomes a victor in the cruel theatre of life. Both the works of Nussbaum and Salomon can be credited as innovative forms of artistic production that they developed under the pressure of events. Their works are intricately linked to the historical conditions under which they were produced, painting under persecution and exile, which amounted to pieces of art which defied the prevailing artistic norms. What seems to develop in both cases is a kind of narrative sequence in which we follow the personal story of the artist. They offer us a rare glimpse into the essence of the individual among the victims of the Holocaust.